नेटवर्क की पूरी
Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his talks with President Trump focused on freeing hostages and eliminating Hamas's military and government capabilities. He insists the job in Gaza is not yet done, but says negotiators are working on a ceasefire as Trump's envoy hopes for a deal this week. Ukraine's Zelensky called for secondary sanctions on Russia's war profits after Moscow launched a record 728 drones overnight. Ukraine also says 8 civilians died in the Russian drone and bombing attacks on Donetsk. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer will welcome France's President Macron to Downing Street for lunch to discuss immigration and Ukraine. The visit marks the first by a European leader since Brexit, with Starmer expected to push for a returns deal on asylum seekers. The Kremlin says it remains calm after President Trump called Putin's Ukraine comments lies during their phone calls. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters Trump's harsh rhetorical style is well known and Moscow takes it in its stride. Spain's conservative opposition leader Alberto Núñez Feijóo has rejected Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's attempt to end a damaging corruption scandal. Feijóo accused the socialists of operating like a criminal organisation, despite Sanchez's public apology and anti-corruption plan. Taiwan began its largest military exercises, testing how forces can decentralise command if China strikes first. The Han-Kuang drills involve HIMARS Sky Sword missiles and 22,000 reservists, but Beijing dismisses them as bluff. President Trump has officially delayed higher tariffs on US imports, sending warnings to 14 countries, including Japan and South Korea. With a 90-day pause ending, Trump says the new August deadline for a 25% levy is firm but not 100% firm as deal talks continue. Pope Leo interrupted his vacation to celebrate Mass in Castel Gandolfo, calling for urgent action on climate change. The new pontiff warned, "We live in a world that is burning," and urged Catholics to take care for creation, following Pope Francis's legacy. Now for our top story, we move to Europe, where the European Union says it wants to strike a trade deal with the United States in the coming days to avoid sweeping new tariffs threatened by President Donald Trump. The EU Commission confirmed it is aiming to seal the deal before August the 1st, when Trump's higher levies are due to kick in. Trump, meanwhile, says negotiations are going well with both the EU and China. EU Trade Commissioner Markos Šefčovič told the European Parliament that EU unity remains absolutely crucial and that the bloc is working to protect itself from trade diversion by other countries. He said their diversification agenda remains a priority and the EU's regulatory framework is non-negotiable. Šefčovič added that they hope to reach a satisfactory result in the coming days and have made good progress on the text of an agreement in principle, with talks continuing remotely every day. The EU insists its priority is a negotiated solution but warns that some rebalancing will remain. The EU has also promised to defend its interests and prepare for all scenarios if talks drag on, with some leaders warning that negotiations remain complicated right up to the deadline. Let's listen in to what the European Commission spokesperson had to say.
The United States has moved its deadline for finalising deals with partner countries to the 1st of August. However, we aim to reach a deal before then, potentially even in the coming days. We have shown our readiness to reach an agreement in principle, and the Commission has consulted closely with our Member States and industry to ensure that there is a high degree of cohesion in our overall EU approach.
We're now joined by Peter Cordello, who's a chief market economist at Spartan Capital Securities. He joins us live from New York to discuss this story further. Peter, there's a lot of optimism coming out of Europe that there can be a trade deal secured here, both from Germany and now the European Union Commission. How realistic is it that Europe gets this job done, given other countries on the agenda for the American president?
Yeah, I think, we're getting very close to some trade deals, and I think that the harsh talk that we're hearing from President Trump is probably not going to be the final conclusion of these trade deals. In other words, I think there'll be less tariffs placed on a lot of countries, especially the bigger companies. In fact, it looks like that there's a good possibility that we'll be hearing from India a trade deal sometime this evening, and that I think would be the first solid deal that will be followed by some of the other major trading partners.
Peter, we obviously can't detect or predict the future, especially when it comes to President Trump. However, in the scenario that these sweeping tariffs do come in, what would they mean for exporters in key sectors like autos and agriculture? And how would the EU be prepared to retaliate or cushion the impact of these Liberation Day tariffs?
Well, I think the impact is going to be inflationary. The problem is that you really don't know what type of inflation you're going to get. And of course, it all depends on what type of agreement that you have. If you have steep tariffs, then the chances of inflation worsening at levels that are undesirable certainly could be a factor. Again, if you have tariffs that are not as steep as perhaps some of the rhetoric that we're hearing, the inflationary effect would not be as high as otherwise, and I think that that's the key here. So, bottom line is this: President Trump and his administration knows that they can only push so far. And so do the other nations. So agreements are likely to come about, and I think within the parameters of inflation heating up, but not to the point where it could be detrimental for the global economy or for the individual economy itself.
Peter, there are 27 European countries in the European Union, all with different import and export trade deficits and capabilities in terms of the United States. How might the EU's focus on unity and non-negotiable regulatory framework limit its flexibility in these talks, especially when it comes to doing business with the Trump administration?
Well, I think, for the most part, you'll have accordance. Of course, you may have one or two members of the EU that might not agree, but at the end, I think it'll be unanimous. In this particular case, I don't think anyone can stand alone. Now, will each individual country present its own case for their own agreement? Of course. But at the end, I think it'll be a unified agreement. And I think that would show strength and not necessarily weakness on the part of the EU or any other bloc.
Peter Cordello, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Your insight is very much of value. We now move on. We stay in Europe, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has met Pope Leo XIV in Rome on Wednesday, their second private meeting since the American-born pontiff took office in May. The Vatican said both sides discussed the urgent need for a just and lasting peace. while Zelensky thanked the Holy See for helping recover Ukrainian children allegedly abducted to Russia. Zelensky also backed the Vatican's offer to host future peace talks with Russia, an idea Moscow has previously rejected. The meeting took place at the Pope's summer residence in Castel Gandolfo, just south of Rome. Zelensky later met US envoy Keith Kellogg, President Trump's representative for Ukraine and Russia, ahead of the Ukraine Recovery Conference this week in the Italian capital. The conference aims to mobilize global support, including private investment, for rebuilding war-torn Ukraine. US support for Kyiv has stalled under President Trump, but this week he pledged to resume arms deliveries and called Russian President Vladimir Putin's narrative on Ukraine lies. Zelensky said Ukraine wants peace and called on the Vatican to help host a summit to end the war. We're now joined by our guest, Ruben Johnson, who's the director of the Asia Research Center at the Casimir Pulaski Foundation. Thank you very much for joining us, Ruben. I want to get into this by starting to say that the Vatican is kind of seen as apolitical in a way. We've seen previous popes meet with Russian and Ukrainian officials alike, officials all over the world. How much real influence does the Vatican have bringing Russia to the table, given Moscow's repeated rejection in these circumstances?
Well, by the way, thank you for having me.
Of course.
Yeah, the Vatican doesn't have the clout that they should have, but that is entirely Russia's fault, because I believe I've talked about this before on this same program, that the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, has said, well, it's inappropriate for the Vatican to be an intermediary in this matter, because it's the Catholic Church, and Russia and Ukraine are both Orthodox nations. So once again, the Russians playing their age-old game of trying to figure out ways to divide people, trying to find fault lines. And he's made this a religious issue rather than one of the Vatican always working on behalf of peace.
Ruben, what are your views on how Vladimir Putin has approached these peace talks, rejecting a Vatican ceasefire negotiation? Why would Vladimir Putin do something like that, especially since he has says that Moscow wants peace since the Trump administration has taken charge? In reality, when we look at it, what are your thoughts?
Well, peace is a very vague term. There's peace in a prison camp. There's peace in a graveyard. There's peace on a battlefield when everyone is dead. That's Vladimir Putin's version of peace. He's never really wanted peace. His conditions never change. They are all very maximalist. They amount to unilateral disarmament and under unconditional surrender on the part of the Ukrainians. He demands the Ukrainians get rid of all their weapons. They destroy all of their fortifications, that they are no longer to receive deliveries of weapons from abroad. Their soldiers are no longer to be trained abroad. They are to reduce the size of it's ridiculous. It's not, these are not serious offers by a serious country. So, if Vladimir Putin ever comes up with a set of proposals that are actually reasonable and negotiable, I'll let you know, but I haven't seen it yet, and I don't expect to see it because of the nature of the kind of person that he is.
Yes, and Ruben, this week we've seen Donald Trump resume arms deliveries to Ukraine after some halting on the Americans' behalf. Alongside this push for Vatican-led talks, what does this say about Washington's shifting approach to this conflict?
This comes down to a very simple dynamic here. There are groups of people within the U.S. defense and foreign policy apparatus, and they actually believe that the United States should not be involved in Europe, and that the United States needs to focus all of its energies on the Pacific theater to defend Taiwan against China, and that the Europeans should be involved in taking care of Europe, and never the twain shall meet. And there have been actually points where I've had people who I thought of as quite intelligent, and when speaking about any other subject, I always felt that they were quite perceptive. But they've even suggested before the war began that maybe Ukraine could just be given away to Russia, and that would cause Russia to settle down, and they wouldn't want anything else, and we would disengage from Russia as a problem, and we could focus all our energies on China. And this goes on, and this I don't understand the complete fallacy of the argument. Why anyone would make this argument that somehow what happens in Ukraine has no relevance to what would happen to Taiwan and vice versa. These things are all linked. All of this stuff is linked. That's what linkage is all about. Anybody who's had Foreign Policy 101 knows what linkage means. But there are some people in Washington that seem to have forgotten.
Reuben Johnson, thank you very much for joining us. You are staying with us to discuss further related matters. Now we move on. Europe's top human rights court has ruled unanimously that Russia was responsible for the downing of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 in 2014, that Moscow repeatedly and systemically violated human rights in Ukraine. The European Court of Human Rights said Russia carried out indiscriminate military attacks, summary executions, torture, including rape and unjustified displacement of civilians. The ruling covered 4 cases, including MH17, and allegations that pro-Russian separatists abducted Ukrainian children and transferred them to Russia. The Strasbourg-based European Court of Human Rights said Russia failed to investigate or cooperate, and that its continued denials caused more suffering for victims' families. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has rejected the court's jurisdiction and said it will not abide by the decision. We're once again joined by Reuben Johnson to discuss this in further detail. Reuben, thank you very much for joining us and discussing this. How significant is it that this unanimous ruling by Europe's top human rights court, do you think it can actually hold Russia accountable when Moscow rejects this court's jurisdiction here of some fairly terrible things? I believe we've had some technical issues there. Apologies. Hopefully, Reuben joins us back soon. Reuben, did you hear my question?
Yeah, I heard your question, sir. Yeah. I'm sorry for there's some network difficulties due to weather here today. I'm sorry for that.
Of course.
Of course, the Russians, of course, they're going to just ignore the findings of the rulings of this court, because this is what they've always done. But it is interesting that it has caused real diplomatic pain, because on a couple of occasions now, Vladimir Putin has been unable to attend a summit of the BRICS countries, because the country where the summit was being held was a country that was a signatory to the ICC treaty, and they would be obligated by law to arrest him and send him to The Hague. And this will continue. The Russians will continue to deny that they've ever done anything wrong. I have said this before on this channel, and I will say it again. Russians are always victims. They're never perpetrators. They've never done anything wrong. Only wrong has been visited upon them. That's the basis of every single argument they ever make. But all of the points you just mentioned, I remember 11 years ago when that airplane was shot down, the Malaysian airliner. And I was even on the BBC on that day talking about it. And it was easy to see how it happened, because they gave an air defense battery to a group of people unqualified and untrained in using it, and without being connected to a larger air traffic control network to know what they were shooting at. The situation, just to switch to another point you made, which I find this one absolutely the most barbaric of all, it's the kidnapping of what we think might be as many as 35,000 Ukrainian children who've been taken to Russia. to be raised and brainwashed and told that their country is terrible and their country's not a real country, and they should wear their special scarf and learn to sing songs about the greatness of Russia and how Ukraine is full of Nazis. And the Russians have prevaricated. They have blocked every single effort to investigate what's going on. The Russian and there are entities in the West that are collecting DNA data. They are doing research. They're trying to find out what some of these children are, and their databases and their communications are actually actively attacked by the Russian intelligence services. And now the Russians, if you can imagine this, they are using these children as a bargaining chip. One of their latest negotiating tactics was that, well, Ukraine, if you'll give us 2 Russian captured soldiers, 2 Russian POWs, we'll give you 1 child. Now that's the Russians. That's how they operate.
Ruben,
and I don't know. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry. Obviously, we've heard of the crimes that Russia has been found guilty of. I want to go back to courts like these and their decisions that they draw, and obviously it gains international media attention, but then when the headlines start coming in and it gets further down the queue, we see that these international courts, what standing do they really have, is my question. You obviously say that we have the cases of the ICC, who have arrest warrants for figures like Vladimir Putin, who have arrest warrants for figures like Benjamin Netanyahu. We've recently seen Rodrigo Duterte being arrested and taken to The Hague. So that would have been seen as an anomaly, it seems, in these situations. What are your thoughts on the effectiveness of these courts and their standings?
Well, they're very effective when the individuals who are put in their crosshairs don't have safe refuge that they can hide in. Obviously, Vladimir Putin does. I have my own opinions about. Somehow, I feel they cause themselves to be taken less seriously when they equate someone like Vladimir Putin with Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, they're not even in the same category. You know, one country suffered a brutal terrorist attack where people have been just slaughtered in the most barbaric way, and the other person is someone who's decided to invade his neighbor and has killed literally tens of thousands of people. Wherever and whenever possible that these courts can, when they're allowed to do their job, they actually have positive results. And I mean, witness what happened with Milosevic, who was the president of Serbia, who was taken in after the wars in the Balkans. I mean, that's a positive example, but these are very few because there's no enforcement mechanism, as you know.
Yes.
But as I said earlier, it does start to cause diplomatic pain when someone like Vladimir Putin cannot go to South Africa for a BRICS summit because they're obligated to arrest him.
Yes, of course.
And it actually, they act, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you, but they act as a unifying force, because in that particular case, the South African president was trying to find a way to allow Putin to come anyway, to come up with some pretzel logic legalese that would allow it to happen, and his parliament wasn't having it.
Yes, Ruben Johnson, thank you very much. We are still discussing with you. US President Donald Trump is expected to begin a visit to the UK in Scotland in the next few weeks. This is part of what is thought to be a trip to visit a new golf course. The trip is separate to the US President's full state visit to the UK, which is expected to take place in September. In a statement, the Scotland Police said that it is planning underway for the visit in July, saying it would involve a significant policing operation. As per reports, as many as 5,000 police officers could be required to work 12-hour shifts as part of the operation. The trip will be the first time Trump has visited Scotland since he won the US election last year. It comes after the US president's son, Eric Trump, previously said his father would attend the opening of a new golf course in Aberdeenshire later during the summer. We're once again joined by Reuben Johnson to discuss this update. Reuben, the US President has been vocal about his fondness for Scotland, and also he has visited there in the past since he has business interests there. Given the geopolitical climate, how significant is it that Donald Trump is visiting the United Kingdom, not on an official state visit, but on a trip to a golf course?
Well, this is actually a good thing. I'm not a golfer, okay, but I know plenty of people who are, and there's no one who plays golf that doesn't dream about a trip to Scotland and possibly playing at St. Andrews. But from a political standpoint, this is actually very good because Trump, as you know, has been very critical of the Europeans. There's been all sorts of controversy about the U.S. commitment to NATO, and Trump saying that the Europeans need to spend more, do more. But he does have a soft spot in his heart, and he has a very great love and respect for the UK royal family. So to the extent that he spends time there and he has people in the UK talking to him about the importance of the Atlantic Alliance, this is a positive in my eyes, and I think we may actually see some further change in the positions of the White House after this visit is concluded.
Reuben Johnson, thank you. You are staying with us for further updates. The Trump administration has escalated its feud with Harvard University, announcing that the Department of Homeland Security plans to issue subpoenas for information on alleged misconduct by foreign students. In addition, the Departments of Education and Health and Human Services have warned Harvard's accrediting body that the university may have violated federal law by failing to address claims of harassment against Jewish students. If Harvard loses its accreditation, students could become ineligible for federal financial aid. Homeland Security officials say they asked for information about the school's student visitor and exchange program, but were repeatedly denied. The administration says this is part of a broader push to reform what it calls elite universities that have become, in its words, bastions of leftist woke thinking and anti-Semitism. Harvard officials have not yet commented, however. We're once again joined by Reuben Johnson to discuss this. What precedent is there, Reuben, for Homeland Security issuing subpoenas to a university over its foreign student programs here? And how unusual is it for this to escalate to threats against a school's accreditation, especially a school like Harvard?
Well, there's no precedent. Homeland Security hasn't been around as a government department for that long. But I don't have any sympathy for Harvard in this case. I mean, we all saw the demonstrations that took place last year. We all saw the horrendous, just abysmal testimony that the Harvard president and the presidents of some of these other elite Ivy League schools gave before Congress. They really need to clean up their act. You can't say it any better than that. I can't sugar the pill for anybody. The stuff that the behavior that they have tolerated is absolutely reprehensible. I don't know. I mean, Harvard was a place that I always thought of in extremely positive terms. I mean, even though it's always had a left-wing orientation on its faculty, but it was always thought of as a premier learning institution. And the people running it now have managed to destroy that reputation. That's just, that's almost criminal, is the way I would describe it.
Reuben, critics would say here that foreign students were exercising their right to free speech. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, but exercising rights to free speech, that does not include vandalism, and that does not include obstructing other students' rights to attend class. It does not include harassing them. I mean, the actions that they got away with in terms of harassing Jewish students would not be tolerated if those students had been a different color or a different gender or a different nationality. But for some reason, when it's Jewish students, it's okay. And again, it's a double standard. and it needs to stop. And I don't know why this is still going on, so many months after these incidents and after after congressional hearings. I don't know who's in charge. I really don't. I don't understand it. But there's a reason why many people I know in America, including myself, did not send our children to any of these American universities. They ended up studying abroad. There's a reason for that.
Reuben Johnson, thank you very much for your insight and joining us on the programme today. We move over to Europe now for our next story, where French President Emmanuel Macron's state visit to Britain shifted to politics, with Prime Minister Keir Starmer expected to press for tougher action on illegal migrant crossings. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and the French President met at 10 Downing Street in London for the second day of Macron's state visit. Here's what Macron had to say during his meeting.
We can feel clearly these close links we have in the friendship between our two countries, our two nations, and ourselves. For me, this state visit and the summit are a unique opportunity in these challenging times to work together on Ukraine, and we will have the opportunity to have this coalition of the willings through VTC on Thursday, right after the summit, to build stronger links and make big moves forward on defense, security, technology, economy, have more exchange on culture, education, research. And when we look at climate change, AI, but as well as this changing time from Ukraine to Middle East, I think the partnership and the friendship between UK and France is absolutely, I would say, a game changer for not just Europeans, but a lot of the nations.
The UK is pushing for a one-in and one-out deal to send migrants back to Europe in return for accepting asylum seekers with British ties. Starmer, under pressure from a surging anti-immigration reform party, said the UK has persuaded France to review coastal policing tactics and migrant interception laws. Over 21,000 migrants have made the dangerous channel crossing from the northern France this year, despite Starmer's pledge to, quote, smash the gangs. Macron, speaking in Parliament, called the crisis a burden on both nations and urged a response rooted in humanity and fairness. The meeting followed a day of pomp with King Charles and a state banquet at Windsor Castle, where both leaders toasted a new entente amicale. Now we move on to a related development. French President Emmanuel Macron says British-French cooperation on artificial intelligence is critical as the two nations face these same challenges. Speaking at London's Imperial College alongside tech leaders including Google, DeepMind co-founder Demis Habbas and Minstrel CEO Arthur Mensch, Macron stressed the need for joint strategies on regulation, research and ethics. The panel was part of his two-day state visit to the United Kingdom, and here's what Macron had to say during the summit.
When we look at the challenge, it's clear that I think it's not just because I'm here, but UK and France are probably the two nations to be part of the race and leading the race in Europe. But we are lagging behind, both the US and China. Let's be lucid. And the big question for all of us is how to be part of the competition and indeed to de-risk our model and not to be dependent on US or Chinese solutions. The partnership between UK and France is for me critical because we exactly face the same challenges. And teaming up together is the best way to have a critical mass when we speak about our talents, our labs, our key players, or our financing capacities. We are still lagging behind the US as well, if we are totally honest, by the necessity we have to increase the number of startups, but to have much more scale-up opportunities, because the level of our tickets remain clearly behind what is on the US side. And this is why I think we need this big AI program on both sides of the channel, but this is why we need a proper European approach.
Now we move over from Europe to the Middle East, where in a significant development, Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar has said that Israel was serious about reaching a Gaza ceasefire, adding that it is achievable. Saar added that if a temporary ceasefire is achieved, Israel will negotiate on a permanent one. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has until now refused to enter talks over an end to the Gaza war until Hamas is defeated. Indirect negotiations between Israel and Hamas over a ceasefire are ongoing this week in Doha. This is in parallel to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Washington, where Israel and the US are intensifying efforts to reach a deal. We're now joined by Shruti Dasgupta, who's a foreign affairs expert, and she joins us live from the Indian capital. Thank you very much, Shruti, for joining us. There's some real optimism that has come about in recent weeks. What concrete steps do you think Israel will need to take to demonstrate that it is genuinely serious about reaching a Gaza ceasefire? There are fears that domestic politics in Israel is what's stopping Benjamin Netanyahu from going over the line here in negotiating an end to the war, including his coalition. However, on the other hand, you have Donald Trump pushing the Israeli Prime Minister to reach this ceasefire deal. Donald Trump does want to be known as this peacemaker. That's what he wants his legacy to be. What compromises do you think are on the table here for Benjamin Netanyahu and his government?
Greetings, Thomas. Thank you for inviting me. For the first time, I have heard Netanyahu put out a statement during this entire 21-month war to say that bringing the hostages back has become his supreme first primary goal. This was said sometime yesterday, and that shows to me that the domestic protests that were being held and the people of Israel, they were demanding that hostages first, Hamas later, and ceasefire is not their first goal. Their first goal is to bring every single live and dead hostage back, has made an impact on the Israeli PM, and he has put people first before his own or his party's political agenda. So that is a sure sign that the people of Israel are speaking out and making sure that the first condition becomes the return of people. And when the people start voicing and are being heard by the PM, who has up till now been very, very one-man show in terms of his policies regarding Hamas, when these people start making an impact on what he says, make him change his stance, I feel there is a chance for an actual ceasefire, a truce to come forth. But again, the initiative lies in the hands of Hamas, as they always had. They could have handed up the entire 251 and waved the white flag, but they didn't. And this, in my own way, I feel it was a trap that was very well laid, and the price was paid by Gazans.
Yes, and Shruti, do you think this stance has come a bit late? As of late June, 50 hostages remain in captivity in Gaza. Of those remaining, at least 27 are confirmed dead by Israeli military intelligence. What are your thoughts on how Israel's approach to this war and the priority and safety of those hostages?
Well, we could never be sure, the world as well as Israel could never be sure how many of the hostages were alive or dead at any given point of time. They had to rely on intelligence sources or what the Hamas was willing to say. As of now, we know that the ceasefire deal would include a release of 10 living and 9 dead hostages and a phased release of the others, so that the truce holds for a while, rather than have your people back and then back to the guns it is. So it is, as I said in an earlier interview, that it is a political capital that Hamas tends to hold, the live and the dead, as a chokehold on Israel and its guns, that if you do not hold the line of peace, we will not send these people back, and which is a very false and very disturbing point of view, because you're not just holding the people who are alive, but the dead ones are not even being given the right to peace and their own religious burial. So it's difficult, But as I said, for the first time, people first, Israelis first has become the priority for PM Netanyahu, and that shows a change in stance, and that might lead to at least a small sliver of peace in that region.
Yes, but we've also had some opposition, Shruti, coming from inside Netanyahu's government, that being that of Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, his finance minister and security minister, and the parties that they are affiliated with. How much impact do you think that Benjamin Netanyahu's grasp on power through coalition will have on these peace talks?
A very fragile one, if I might say so, because the opposition demands a complete total annihilation of Hamas, because as we've known, this is history repeating itself, and Hamas regroups, rearms, and then attacks, replans and attacks. And despite the other wars that have happened in the Middle East right now, they are not completely as obliterated by the war and aggression by Israel as they would want to believe. So the right-wing coalition is wanting to put an end to this decades-long struggle that they have faced since the very moment of their inception of the land of Israel. So they want an end to that, and they're pushing Netanyahu for it. But Netanyahu cannot, it's a small piece of land, and you might argue that Gaza is smaller than Israel, but Israel is surrounded by supporters of Gaza. It is surrounded by the Yemen, which is not physically, geopolitically surrounded. And it is being pressurized by Egypt to do the right and sit on the talking table. And it is being pressurized by Lebanon. And so it is difficult for Netanyahu to hold a hard line of aggression without paying in blood and consequences himself. On the other side of this argument, he has also, in the last few days, has walked into a part of his battalions have walked into southern Lebanon and said that they are doing this to manage and control and limit Hezbollah. They have also fired on ports in Yemen, and they have downed a power plant in Yemen. And so while the peace talks are continuing with Hamas, Israel continues to try to attain a level of leverage over all these proxy actors that tend to work in the favor of Gaza.
Yes, Shruti Dasgupta, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Your insight is always very much valued. We now move over to the world of tech in the United States, where Elon Musk's artificial intelligence firm, XAI, has deleted inappropriate posts on X after the company's chatbot, Grok, began praising Adolf Hitler, referring to itself as Me Cha Hitler, and making anti-Semitic comments in response to user queries. In some now deleted posts, it referred to a person with a common Jewish surname as someone who was celebrating the tragic deaths of white kids, end quote, in the Texas floods as future fascists. In another post, it said Hitler would have called it out and crushed it. After users began pointing out the responses, Grok deleted some of the posts and restricted the chatbot to generating images rather than text replies. The sharp turn in Grok responses on Tuesday came after changes to the AI that Musk announced last week. Now we move to a related development, where after Grok's questionable posts on X, Linda Leccarino is stepping down as CEO after 2 years of leading Elon Musk's social media company. This comes a day after the company's Grok chatbot began pushing anti-Semitic tropes in response to users. However, it's not clear that the events were connected. Her exit also comes months after Musk sold X, his social media company, to XAI, his artificial intelligence company. The move formally combined the two entities that were already closely intertwined, but raised questions about Leccarino's role in the company. Leccarino announced her exit in a post on the platform, saying she is immensely grateful to Musk for entrusting her with the responsibility of protecting free speech turning the company around and transforming X into the everything app. Now we move over to the Indo-Pacific, where China is prepared to enhance its collaboration with the United Nations to jointly promote a more just and equitable international order. Chinese Premier Li Kuang stated during a meeting with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on the sidelines of the June the 17th BRICS summit. Li praised the United Nations for its crucial contributions over the past 80 years in maintaining global peace and fostering shared development. Noting growing global instability and uncertainty, Li emphasized that the UN must assume a more effective role in addressing these challenges. He highlighted that the vision of building a community with a shared future for mankind and the 3 major global initiatives put forward by President Xi Jinping align closely with the UN Charter, showcasing China's firm commitment to multilateralism and support for the UN's mission. As global affairs become increasingly complex, Li underlined the importance of defending the UN's authority. He affirmed China's support for the UN's central role in global governance and pledged to work with all nations to uphold genuine multilateralism and advance the UN's goals. We're now joined by Andrew KP Lung, who's a China strategist, and he joins us live from Hong Kong. Thank you very much for joining us, Andrew. How should we interpret Premier Li Kuang's call for the UN to play a more effective role? Is this a genuine push for reform or an attempt by China to shape global governance more in its favour?
Well, first of all, I'm now in London, not Hong Kong. I'm in
Apologies,
London on holiday. So I'm speaking in a park in London. Anyway, referring to your question, let's not forget that President Xi had long time advocated for a fairer and more cooperative world instead of relying on rules of the jungle and shifting towards the interests of a single nation. He has introduced 2 initiatives, 3 initiatives rather. The first is the Global Security Initiative. Again, relying on the UN Charter, the sovereignty of a single nation. So the Global Security Initiative suggests that countries should really examine the other side's security concerns, as in the case of, for example, Ukraine, rather than just on the one side of United States or Russia or Ukraine itself, so as to come to some sort of a solution for a crisis, or rather than relying on confrontation. The other initiative is called a Global Development Initiative, which means that at the end of the day, countries have got to struggle to feed their people, to grow the economy, to maintain stability, where countries are greatly affected by common concerns like climate change, like AI, lots of opportunities for countries to cooperate. And in cooperation, there are bound to be conflicts, and these conflicts must be resolved under the UN Charter. And then the third initiative is called the Global Civilization Initiative, which means that there are so many ideologies and religion and histories around the world, and there are bound to be conflicts. Let's not forget that about the Crusades, for example, in the Middle Ages. Now the modern world cannot afford such a large-scale confrontation between civilizations, because now we are in a nuclear age, and we are in a rapidly developing age. So I think that these 3 initiatives coalesce to the Chinese position of support of reforming the United Nations. And now the United Nations supports has a lot of defects, and then the veto powers. There are 5. They are the relics of the end of the Second World War. But then each country guards their own interests, because each of these countries has a veto, and then no decision can pass through without all agreeing, and this is almost impossible. So I think that mechanism may need to be modified. Secondly, the only 5 countries holding veto powers ignore the emerging
Andrew,
countries.
I'm so sorry to cut you off. We're having some technical issues with your connection. We have to move on. I hope you have a lovely rest of your holiday. However, we move over to the United States for our next story, where in the devastating Texas flood, where more than 100 people lost their lives, we have a live by Kerrville Police Department. Let's listen in.
On deck event for a very different reason. But our officers have been working without time off, without any downtime, 16, 18, 20-hour shifts, without complaint. Yesterday was the first day we were able to give a couple of them some downtime. So we sent an officer home to rest. But rather than taking a day off, a much well-deserved day off, he got up and he put on his gear and he volunteered to go out on foot with a ground search party. And he spent his day up and down the Guadalupe River, going over, under, around trees, searching for victims to try and reunite the missing with their families. I think that is Texans helping Texans in the greatest sense of the word. That's what community is. And that's what's important right now. I want to continue to thank y'all for helping us spread the messages that need to be spread. Before I open this up for a very few questions, just ask you to please, just ask you to please say your name and who you're with before we do that. Yes, sir, right here. Oh, I'm sorry. The mayor is supposed to speak now. I apologize. Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry.
Good morning, everyone. As Jonathan Lamb has said, this is also a story of heroes. Kevin Walter, thank you for all you've done. Every first responder, thank you for all you have done. The recent numbers reported break my heart. And they break the heart of everyone up here, everyone who's been working since July the 4th. I want you to know, I think it's important for the public to know, I think it's important for the families to know. In that Emergency Operations Center, there's not little silos of departments and agencies. They're working as one team with one goal, to find the missing and bring them home. I'm grateful for every first responder, every helper in every field. Those who are feeding the hungry, those who are providing shelter to people who have no home, those who are providing clothing, who no longer have a wardrobe. I'm also grateful for the generosity of the world. 2 companies that are hometown companies, companies that started in Kerrville, Texas, announced today and yesterday that they will be donating to the relief effort. Everyone in Kerrville is proud of HEB and James Avery Artisan Jewelry. Had a different name for so long, I'm sorry. Those 2 companies started here. Their heart is here. We are committed to helping others. After you all go home or go to the next story, we will still be here. We live here. We've lost friends here. If you feel able to donate to the relief fund, the best source we are recommending is the Community Foundation of the Texas Hill Country. That's the community their website is communityfoundation.net. There's a link at the top of that page to help you donate. Now listen, I'm married to a retired first grade teacher. And I learned a little bit about classroom management from her. If you yell questions at us, we're probably going to pick someone else to answer, okay? So if you feel the need to yell your questions, I will feel the need to not answer your question. In first grade, they raised their hands. That might be a good start. Yesterday was a disaster, and I was embarrassed. Our town was embarrassed. Your viewers were embarrassed. And I don't want that to happen again. Now, I'm going to do something I've been told to do. I'm going to turn it back to Jonathan Lamb to start the question and answer period. However, please make my retired first grade teacher wife proud and raise your hands. Thank you.
Okay, once again, just say your name, please, and who you're with. And I had already called on you, so yes, sir.
Ernie's going to go with KSAT 12 San Antonio. Question for the sheriff. The code red alert system has come under a lot of scrutiny in recent days, and now there's reports of a timeline on Friday morning where an Ingram volunteer fire department commander asked a Kirk County Sheriff dispatcher for the code red to be issued. The dispatcher says, I can't, I have to get a supervisor's approval for that. Almost 6 hours passes until 10 o'clock, when 10:04, when the code red is issued. How do you account for that lapse of time? What happened and what could have happened at that time?
Okay. As I've said earlier, with every significant event, we're going, with every emergency, we're going to have to, there's going to be an after action. Please, y'all, listen to those words, after action, okay? Those questions are going to be answered. I believe those questions need to be answered to the family of the missed loved ones, to the public, to the people that put me in this office. Those need to be, and I want that answer, and we're going to get that answer. And I know that's going to be asked over and over. Please understand that. We're not running. We're not going to hide from everything. That's going to be checked into at a later time. I wish I could tell you that time. I don't know that time. Let me share something with y'all. One of the main things I've been doing is going and visiting the family. We still have some of those missed loved ones here. I go visit them twice a day. As a sheriff, what I want is I want closure for those people. Okay, and those are important questions. We will answer those questions. I wish y'all would bear with me in that. Okay, bear with me. We'll get them. I can't tell you in a week or two. Okay, we're going to get them. I'm not trying to deflect them. Okay, my primary. I asked you. I've been in this business 36 years. I don't know if any of y'all, how many of y'all have gave notifications, death notifications. I've done them. What is worse, a death notification or telling somebody I don't know where your loved one was? That's my priority. Okay, now please understand that.
Sir, Sergeant Lamb. Sergeant Lamb. Sergeant Lamb.
Tammy from the Hill Country Community Journal.
Yes, that's a lot.